When desperation meets greed, ordinary people can become monsters. But what happens when a stepmother's twisted solution to poverty leads her to sell her own stepchildren like cattle? The shocking truth behind her actions will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about family bonds. What you're about to hear is a story that will challenge your understanding of human nature, survival, and the lengths people will go to escape their circumstances. This isn't just another tale of family betrayal. This is a story about children who discovered strength they never knew they possessed, and justice that came from the most unexpected place. Don't miss how this ends, so subscribe now and stay tuned for more powerful stories that reveal the resilience of the human spirit. Kemi Okafor never imagined her life would take such a dark turn. Growing up in the bustling streets of Lagos, Nigeria, she had dreams that stretched far beyond the cramped apartment she shared with her younger brother, Tunde. At 15, Kemi was the kind of girl who helped neighbors with their children, sang in the church choir, and studied by candlelight when the electricity failed. Her bright smile could light up any room, and her gentle nature made everyone in their community love her. Tunde, just 12 years old, was Kemi's shadow. Wherever she went, he followed with his infectious laughter and curious questions about everything around him. The siblings had an unbreakable bond, forged through years of navigating life without their mother, who had died when Tunde was only 5. Their father, Mr. Adebayo, worked as a security guard at a local bank, earning just enough to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. Life wasn't easy, but it was theirs. They had each other, and that felt like enough. Everything changed the day their father brought home Folake. She was beautiful, with smooth, dark skin and eyes that seemed to sparkle with warmth. When Mr. Adebayo introduced her as his new wife, Kemi felt a mixture of hope and uncertainty. Maybe having a mother figure would bring stability to their home. Maybe Folake would fill the void their mother's death had left behind. At first, Folake seemed perfect. She cooked elaborate meals, kept the house spotless, and spoke sweetly to both children. She would braid Kemi's hair in intricate patterns and tell Tunde stories about brave warriors from their ancestors. The neighbors praised Mr. Adebayo for finding such a wonderful woman to care for his children, but masks have a way of slipping when no one is watching. The first sign of trouble came 3 months after the wedding. Mr. Adebayo had been working longer hours, taking on extra shifts to save money for Folake's pregnancy. She was expecting their first child together, and the family was preparing for the new addition. During those long evenings when their father was away, Folake's demeanor began to shift. Her sweet words turned sharp. Her gentle touches became rough. The loving glances she once gave Kemi and Tunde were replaced with cold stares that made them feel like unwelcome guests in their own home. One evening, as Kemi helped wash dishes after dinner, Folake grabbed her wrist tightly. "You think you're so special because you look like your dead mother," she hissed, her voice low enough that Tunde couldn't hear from the next room. "But you're nothing, just a burden your father is too soft to get rid of." Kemi's heart pounded as she stared into eyes that no longer held any warmth. "I'm sorry if I did something wrong," she whispered, trying to pull her wrist free. Folake's grip tightened. "Everything about you is wrong. You and that brother of yours are reminders of a life that should have stayed buried." From that night forward, the house became a battlefield where only one side knew they were fighting. When Mr. Adebayo was home, Folake transformed back into the loving stepmother, praising the children and showering them with affection. But the moment he left for work, the torture began. She would force Kemi to scrub floors until her knees were raw, then criticize every spot she missed. Tunde was made to stand in the corner for hours as punishment for imaginary offenses. The psychological warfare was relentless. Folake would hide their school supplies and then accuse them of being irresponsible. She would prepare delicious meals and eat them in front of the hungry children, claiming they hadn't earned the right to eat. She would invite neighborhood children over to play, but forbid Kemi and Tunde from joining, telling everyone they were being punished for bad behavior. The worst part was that isolation. Folake systematically destroyed their relationships with extended family members, telling lies about their behavior and turning relatives against them. She convinced their father that the children were becoming rebellious and difficult, requiring stricter discipline. "They're testing you," she would whisper to Mr. Adebayo during their private moments. "If you don't show them who's in charge now, they'll never respect our family." Kemi watched helplessly as her father, exhausted from work and manipulated by his wife's lies, began to distance himself from his own children. The man who once read them bedtime stories and helped with homework now barely looked at them during dinner. 6 months into the marriage, Folake gave birth to a baby girl named Aduni. The arrival of the new baby should have been a joyful time, but instead, it marked the beginning of an even darker chapter. Folake's cruelty intensified as she used the baby as a weapon, claiming that Kemi and Tunde were jealous and trying to harm their half-sister. "They pinched the baby while I was sleeping," she would tell their father, tears streaming down her face. "I'm afraid they're going to hurt her because they don't want to share you." The lies were so convincing, so carefully crafted, that Mr. Adebayo began to believe his own children were capable of harming an innocent baby. He started locking their bedroom door at night, supposedly to protect Aduni from her jealous siblings. As weeks turned to months, the psychological abuse took its toll. Kemi, once vibrant and hopeful, became withdrawn and fearful. She stopped singing in the church choir, stopped helping neighbors, and spent most of her time trying to protect Tunde from Folake's increasingly violent outbursts. Tunde, just a child trying to understand why his world had turned upside down, began having nightmares and wetting the bed. Folake used these incidents as further proof that the children were disturbed and needed to be dealt with harshly. The community that once embraced them now looked at them with suspicion. Folake had spread rumors about their behavior, painting them as problem children who were making life difficult for their loving stepmother. People who had known them since birth began to avoid them, believing the carefully constructed lies. But Folake's cruelty was just the beginning. As months passed and her own financial pressures mounted, she began to see Kemi and Tunde not as children to be cared for, but as problems to be solved. Her twisted mind started calculating the value of their young lives, and the solution she devised would shock even those who thought they knew how evil she could be. The night everything changed started like any other. Mr. Adebayo was working a double shift, and Folake was alone with the 3 children. Baby Adoni was sleeping peacefully in her crib, but Kemi and Tunde were about to discover that their stepmother had been planning something far worse than they could have ever imagined. As Kemi helped Tunde with his homework at the small kitchen table, she noticed Folake making several phone calls, speaking in hushed tones, and glancing at them with a look that made her blood run cold. There was something different about her stepmother's demeanor that night, something that felt final and terrifying. What Kemi didn't know was that Folake had already made arrangements that would change their lives forever. The phone calls weren't random conversations, they were negotiations, and the price being discussed wasn't for goods or services. It was for them. The sound of hushed conversations and clinking coins filled the small apartment as Kemi tried to focus on helping Tunde with his mathematics homework, but something felt wrong. The air was thick with tension, and every few minutes, Folake would glance at them with an expression that made Kemi's stomach churn. Kemi, I can't understand this problem, Tunde whispered, pointing at the numbers on his worn notebook. Let me help you, Kemi replied softly, but her attention kept drifting to the strange men who had been visiting their home more frequently over the past week. They spoke in low voices with Folake, their eyes scanning the children like they were evaluating livestock. That night, as Kemi tucked Tunde into bed, she noticed how thin he had become. Folake's rationing of their food had taken its toll. His once round cheeks were hollow, and his school uniform hung loose on his small frame. But his eyes still held that spark of innocence that reminded Kemi why she had to protect him. Sister Kemi, Tunde whispered as she pulled the threadbare blanket up to his chin. I heard Mama Folake talking about us today. She said we were going to help the family. Kemi's heart raced. What do you mean, help the family? She said we could be useful somewhere else, that we could make money for baby Aduni's school fees. The words hit Kemi like a physical blow. She'd overheard fragments of conversations, seen the way those strange men looked at them, noticed how Folake had been asking detailed questions about their health and habits. The pieces of a horrifying puzzle were beginning to form in her mind. Don't worry about it, Tunde. Just go to sleep, she managed to say, forcing her voice to remain calm. But sleep would not come for Kemi that night. She lay awake listening to the sounds of the apartment, her mind racing with terrible possibilities. Around midnight, she heard Folake's voice through the thin walls, speaking on the phone with someone. Yes, they're both healthy. The girl is 15, very strong, good for heavy work. The boy is 12, small but quick. They'll adapt well to new environments. Kemi's blood ran cold. The conversation continued with discussions of prices, locations, and arrangements that made her realize the unthinkable truth. Folake wasn't just planning to send them away, she was planning to sell them. The next morning, Folake's behavior was different, almost cheerful. She prepared a proper breakfast for the first time in months, watching with satisfaction as the hungry children ate quickly. Eat up, my dears, she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. You'll need your strength for the journey ahead. What journey? Kemi asked, though she dreaded the answer. I've found a wonderful opportunity for both of you, a family upcountry who needs help with their business. They'll provide food, shelter, and even some education, much better than what we can offer here. The lies flowed so smoothly that anyone listening might have believed Folake genuinely cared about their welfare, but Kemi saw through the deception. She had heard the phone conversation. She knew what was really happening. When do we leave? Kemi asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Tonight. The arrangements are already made. That afternoon, while Folake was out making final preparations, Kemi made a desperate decision. She had to try to save them both. She gathered what little money she had managed to hide over the months, just a few coins from small errands she had done for neighbors. Tunde, we need to leave, now. But Mama Folake said we're going to help a nice family. Tunde, listen to me carefully. Mama Folake is not sending us to help anyone. She's selling us to people who will hurt us. The innocence in Tunde's eyes began to crack as the reality of their situation sank in. Selling us? Like things at the market? Yes, but we're not going to let that happen. They slipped out of the apartment that afternoon, hoping to reach their father's workplace before Folake returned. But their stepmother had anticipated this possibility. She had already spoken to the neighbors, telling them the children might try to run away because they were afraid of the discipline they would receive in their new home. When Mrs. Aduni, their elderly neighbor, saw them hurrying down the street with their few belongings, she called out to them, Kemi, Tunde, your stepmother is looking for you. She's very worried. Before they could explain, Mrs. Aduni had already sent word to Folake. Within minutes, their stepmother appeared with two of the strange men who had been visiting their home. There you are, my troublesome children, Folake said loud enough for the gathering neighbors to hear, running away when I'm trying to help you build a better future. The men grabbed the children firmly but not roughly, maintaining the illusion that this was a normal family matter. To the watching neighbors, it looked like concerned adults retrieving disobedient children. Please, Kemi begged, looking at the faces of people who had known her since birth. She's not trying to help us. She's selling us. But the neighbors had already been poisoned against them by months of Folake's lies. They saw her tears, heard her explanations about ungrateful stepchildren, and believed what they wanted to believe. Kemi, you should be thankful, Mrs. Aduni said sternly. Your stepmother is giving you opportunities many children would be grateful for. As they were led back to the apartment, Kemi caught sight of her father returning from work. For a moment, hope flared in her chest. Surely he would protect them. Surely he would see through Folake's deception. Papa, she cried out, struggling against the man's grip. Papa, please help us. Mr. Adebayo looked tired and confused as Folake quickly approached him with her version of events. Darling, they tried to run away from the opportunity I arranged for them. They're so ungrateful. I'm only trying to help them become independent and contribute to society. Is this true, Kemi? Her father asked, his voice weary. No, Papa. She's lying. She's selling us to these men. Please don't let her do this. But Mr. Adebayo looked at his wife's tearful face, at the respectable-looking men who nodded sympathetically, at the neighbors who murmured about the children's difficult behavior. The months of manipulation had done their work. He no longer trusted his own children's words over his wife's tears. Kemi, you're being dramatic. Your stepmother only wants what's best for you. Those words shattered the last hope Kemi had held on to. Her own father, the man who had raised her, who had once called her his little princess, was choosing to believe the lies over his own daughter's desperate pleas. That night, as they were locked in their room, waiting for their fate to be sealed, Tunde clung to his sister. What's going to happen to us, Sister Kemi? Kemi held him close, feeling the weight of responsibility for both their lives. I don't know, Tunde, but I promise you, no matter what happens, we'll survive this. We'll find a way back to each other, and we'll find a way to make them pay for what they've done. Outside their door, she could hear Folake laughing as she counted money. The sound of their stepmother's joy at their suffering burned itself into Kemi's memory, fueling a determination that would sustain her through the darkness ahead. The men returned at dawn, and this time there would be no escape. As the sun rose over Lagos, casting long shadows through the cramped apartment, Kemi heard the heavy footsteps approaching their door. The lock clicked open, and Folake entered with the two men who had become the architects of their nightmare. Time to go, one of them said simply, his voice devoid of any emotion. Kemi's heart pounded as she shook Tunde awake. His sleepy eyes widened with fear as he remembered what was happening. She squeezed his hand tightly, trying to transfer some of her courage to him. Remember what I told you, she whispered. We survived this together. The men led them out of the apartment as Folake watched from the doorway, baby Aduni in her arms. For a brief moment, Kemi caught her stepmother's eye, and what she saw there chilled her to the bone. There was no remorse, No second thoughts, just cold calculation and relief. Take care of yourselves, Folake called out, loud enough for any listening neighbors to hear. Work hard and make us proud. The performance was flawless. To anyone watching, it looked like a caring stepmother sending her children off to better opportunities. But Kemi knew the truth. They were being sold like cattle, their childhood stolen for the price of a few thousand naira. The journey to their destination took 2 days. They traveled in the back of a covered truck with other children, all of them bearing the same look of fear and confusion. Some were older, some younger, but all shared the same hollow expression of those who had been betrayed by the very people meant to protect them. During the journey, Kemi learned fragments of other stories. There was Amina, a 13-year-old whose uncle had sold her after her parents died. There was Joseph, barely 10 years old, whose own mother had traded him for money to feed her addiction. Each story was a variation of the same theme: adults who had chosen greed over the sacred duty of protecting children. They were taken to a remote area outside Kaduna, where dozens of children were being held in a large compound surrounded by high walls and barbed wire. The facility looked like a school from the outside, but inside, it was a prison where children were prepared for various forms of exploitation. Some would be sent to work in mines, others to wealthy households as unpaid servants, and still others to places Kemi didn't want to think about. The organizers of this operation had built a sophisticated network that stretched across multiple states, with contacts in government offices who ensured their activities remained hidden. For 3 weeks, Kemi and Tunde were kept in the compound, fed just enough to maintain their health while being evaluated for their potential uses. Kemi's literacy and maturity made her valuable as a house servant, while Tunde's small size made him suitable for factory work where adult hands couldn't reach. But Kemi refused to accept this fate. Every night, she whispered plans to Tunde, teaching him to memorize important details about their location, the faces of their captors, and the routines of the guards. She knew that if they were going to survive, they needed to be smart, patient, and ready to act when the moment came. That moment arrived during their 4th week in captivity. A government raid, triggered by a tip from a former victim who had escaped months earlier, descended on the compound at dawn. The sound of sirens and shouting filled the air as law enforcement officers stormed the facility. In the chaos that followed, Kemi grabbed Tunde's hand and ran toward the confusion, hoping to find safety among the officers. What they found instead was something that would change their lives forever. Inspector Sarah Okonkwo, a veteran police officer who specialized in human trafficking cases, was leading the raid. When she saw the two siblings clinging to each other amid the chaos, something in their eyes reminded her of her own children. She made a decision that went beyond her professional duties. "You're safe now," she told them, kneeling down to their level. "I'm going to make sure you get home." But when Inspector Okonkwo investigated their case, she discovered the horrifying truth about Folake's involvement. The evidence was overwhelming. Phone records, financial transactions, and testimonies from other rescued children all pointed to a systematic operation where parents and guardians were selling children to traffickers. The investigation revealed that Folake had been working with the trafficking network for months, identifying vulnerable children in her community and facilitating their sale. Kemi and Tunde weren't her first victims. She had been responsible for the disappearance of at least 6 other children from their neighborhood. When the authorities came to arrest Folake, they found her packing hastily, baby Aduni crying in her arms. The money she had received for selling the children was hidden in various locations throughout the apartment, evidence of her crimes literally buried in the walls. Mr. Adebayo, who had been at work when the arrest occurred, returned home to find his world completely shattered. The woman he had trusted with his children, the woman he had married and loved, was a monster who had sold his own flesh and blood. "I didn't know," he kept repeating, as Inspector Okonkwo showed him the evidence. "I thought she was helping them. I thought they were just being difficult." The weight of his failure as a father crushed him. He had been so manipulated, so blinded by Folake's lies, that he had handed his children over to their tormentor. The guilt would haunt him for the rest of his life. During Folake's trial, the full extent of her crimes was revealed. She had been part of a larger network that had trafficked over 200 children across West Africa. Her role was to identify vulnerable children, gain their families' trust, and then facilitate their sale to the highest bidders. The courtroom was packed with families of victims, journalists, and advocates for children's rights. When Folake was brought in, wearing prison clothes and shackles, she looked nothing like the beautiful, charming woman who had once fooled an entire community. Kemi, now 16 and stronger than ever, was called to testify. As she stood before the court, facing the woman who had destroyed her childhood, she felt no fear, only a burning desire for justice. "She didn't just sell our bodies," Kemi said, her voice clear and strong. "She sold our trust, our innocence, our belief that family means protection. She took children who had already lost so much and made them lose even more." The judge, moved by the testimonies of the victims and the overwhelming evidence, sentenced Folake to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole. It was one of the harshest sentences ever given for human trafficking in the region. But justice in the courtroom was only the beginning of the siblings' journey toward healing. Inspector Okonkwo, who had grown attached to Kemi and Tunde during the investigation, helped them navigate the difficult process of rebuilding their lives. They couldn't return to their father, who was struggling with his own guilt and depression. Instead, they were placed with a loving aunt who had been searching for them since their disappearance. Kemi threw herself into her education with a fierce determination. She studied law, driven by a desire to protect other children from experiencing what she and Tunde had endured. She became an advocate for victims' rights, working with organizations that fought human trafficking. Tunde, despite his young age during the ordeal, showed remarkable resilience. He excelled in school and developed a passion for journalism, wanting to tell the stories of those who had been silenced by their circumstances. Years later, Kemi established a foundation that provided support for trafficking survivors and worked to prevent vulnerable children from falling into the hands of predators. Her work gained international recognition, and she became a powerful voice in the fight against human trafficking. The Foundation's first major initiative was establishing safe houses where rescued children could heal and rebuild their lives. These weren't just shelters, but homes where trained counselors, teachers, and volunteers provided the love and support that had been stolen from these young lives. During the Foundation's 5th anniversary celebration, Kemi stood before a crowd of supporters, survivors, and advocates. Tunde, now a successful journalist, sat in the front row with tears in his eyes as his sister spoke. "We were sold by someone who was supposed to protect us," Kemi said, her voice carrying the weight of experience and the strength of survival. "But we were not broken by that betrayal. We were forged by it. Every child we save, every family we reunite, every trafficker we help bring to justice is proof that evil cannot have the final word." The audience erupted in applause, but Kemi's eyes were focused on the group of young survivors sitting near the stage, children who had been rescued from similar situations, who were now safe, educated, and hopeful about their futures. In the years that followed, Folake's case became a landmark in the fight against human trafficking. New laws were passed, enforcement was strengthened, and public awareness campaigns educated communities about the signs of trafficking and the importance of protecting vulnerable children. Folake herself never showed remorse for her actions. Even in prison, she maintained that she had been helping the children find better opportunities. Her complete lack of empathy became a case study for psychologists and criminologists studying the minds of those who exploit children. Mr. Adebayo, consumed by guilt and shame, eventually sought therapy to deal with his failure as a father. He spent the rest of his life working with organizations that helped fathers recognize and resist manipulation, sharing his story as a warning to other parents. Baby Adoni, innocent of her mother's crimes, was raised by Mr. Adebayo's sister in a loving environment. As she grew older, she learned about her mother's crimes and chose to dedicate her life to social work, helping families stay together and protecting children from abuse. The trafficking network that Folake had been part of was eventually dismantled completely. Over 50 people were arrested, including government officials who had been taking bribes to look the other way. The investigation sparked a nationwide crackdown on human trafficking that saved thousands of children. Today, Kemi and Tunde's story serves as both a warning and an inspiration. It reminds us that evil can wear the mask of love, that those closest to us can sometimes be our greatest threats, but it also shows us that the human spirit, even when broken, can heal and become stronger. Their foundation has now rescued over 3,000 children from trafficking situations. Each rescue is a victory against the darkness that once threatened to consume them. Each child saved is proof that love, justice, and determination can triumph over the most horrific circumstances. Kemi often tells the children at her foundation that their past does not define their future. She knows this because she lived it. The girl who was once sold like cattle became a powerful advocate for justice. The boy who was once deemed worthless became a voice for the voiceless. Folake thought she was disposing of problems when she sold Kemi and Tunde. Instead, she created two of the most effective weapons in the fight against the evil she represented. Her greed and cruelty backfired spectacularly, turning her victims into her greatest opponents. This is the power of resilience, the strength of the human spirit, and the ultimate triumph of good over evil. No matter how dark the night, dawn always comes. No matter how deep the wound, healing is possible. And no matter how powerful the oppressor, justice will eventually prevail. The stepmother who sold siblings for money thought she was writing the end of their story. Instead, she was writing the beginning of their greatest chapter, and that chapter continues to inspire hope in the hearts of survivors everywhere.